It is the year 1337. Europe stands at the threshold of a storm that will rage for more than a century. In this struggle, two great kingdoms, England and France, will clash in battle after battle, siege after siege, decade after decade. It is a war that will shatter the old order, redefine nations, and leave legends that endure to this day. The 100 Years' War, despite its name, it was not one single and broken conflict, but rather a series of wars, truces, and flare-ups stretching across 116 years. Yet in the minds of those who lived through it, it was a single, vast ordeal, an age where entire generations knew nothing but war. It was a contest for thrones, but also a battle for survival, identity, and power. It brought forth some of history's most famous names: Edward the Black Prince, Henry V, Charles V of France, and of course Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans. It witnessed triumphs like Crécy and Agincourt, and tragedies of famine, plague, and burned villages. Tonight, we will retrace this epic tale. We will see how it began with a disputed crown, how it unfolded in waves of victories and defeats, how it shaped the destinies of England, and the roots of the 100 Years' War lay deep in the tangled web of medieval feudalism and dynastic politics. For centuries, the kings of England were not merely rulers of their island, thanks to the marriage of Eleanor of Aquitaine to Henry II in the 12th century. The English crown controlled vast territories in France, lands stretching from Normandy in the north to Aquitaine in the south. This made the English kings powerful French dukes, and therein lay the problem: they owed feudal homage to the King of France, even while ruling an independent kingdom across the Channel. This relationship bred suspicion and rivalry. French monarchs wanted to reclaim those territories. English monarchs clung to them fiercely. By the early 14th century, tensions were already high. Then, in 1328, King Charles IV of France died without a male heir. His closest male relative was his nephew Edward III of England, son of Charles's sister Isabella. Edward believed this gave him the right to inherit the French throne. But French nobles invoked Salic law, a Frankish legal principle that excluded inheritance through the female line. They crowned Philip VI of Valois instead. Edward initially did homage to Philip for his lands in Gascony, but the relationship soured. French interference in Flanders, where English rule was vital to the cloth trade, cut at the heart of England's economy. Skirmishes escalated. In 1337, Philip confiscated Edward's lands in Aquitaine. Edward retaliated by declaring himself the rightful king of France. The 100 Years' War had begun, but war was not waged only on dynastic claims. The 14th century was a time of broader crisis. The papacy had moved to Avignon, casting doubt on its independence. The Black Death loomed on the horizon. Europe was restless, hungry, and ripe for upheaval. Against this backdrop, England and France locked themselves into a war that would consume them both. The war's opening decades were marked by dazzling English victories. In 1340, the English navy annihilated the French fleet at the Battle of Sluys. For the first time, England could project its power across the Channel at will. 6 years later, in 1346, Edward III invaded France. At Crécy, near the Somme River, his army faced overwhelming numbers. Yet Edward deployed a new weapon to devastating effect: the longbow. English archers unleashed a storm of arrows that cut down French knights by the thousands. The traditional knight of heavy cavalry crumbled before disciplined infantry and missile fire. The victory at Crécy was followed by the siege of Calais, which fell to the English after a year of starvation. Calais would remain in English hands for more than 2 centuries, a gateway into France. Then, in 1356, Edward's son the Black Prince won a triumph at Poitiers. There, not only did the English defeat the French, they captured King John II himself. Their ransom was colossal. France was thrown into chaos, its countryside ravaged by mercenaries, its peasants rising in the violent Jacquerie Revolt of 1358. By 1360, the Treaty of Brittany ceded vast territories to England. Edward renounced, at least formally, his claim to the French crown in exchange for near sovereignty over Aquitaine. England seemed ascendant. Yet France was not finished. In 1364, Charles V, known as the Wise, took the throne. He abandoned reckless charges against English longbows and instead relied on Fabian tactics. His general, Bertrand du Guesclin, a master of guerrilla warfare, avoided pitched battles, harassed English garrisons, and slowly reconquered territory. By the late 1370s, most of Edward III's gains had been erased. Meanwhile, plague, taxation, and unrest weakened England. When Edward III died in 1377, he was succeeded by Richard II, a boy king ill-prepared for the storms ahead. The war entered a lull, but the embers still smoldered. The conflict reignited with ferocity under Henry V in 1415, determined to assert his claim and unite his kingdom under a common cause. Henry crossed into France with a modest army. After besieging Harfleur, he marched his sick and starving troops toward Calais. Along the way, at Agincourt, he faced an immense French force. The field was narrow and muddy, bordered by woods. The French, in heavy armor, advanced into the mire. Bottlenecked and exhausted, Henry's archers rained arrows upon them. Knights fell, were trampled by their own ranks, and suffocated in the mud. Against all odds, England triumphed. Agincourt became immortalized as one of the most glorious victories in English history. Henry pressed his advantage. In 1420, the Treaty of Troyes made him heir to the French throne, disinheriting the Dauphin Charles. Henry married Catherine of Valois, cementing the union. For a moment, it appeared that the crowns of England and France would indeed be united. But destiny had other plans. Henry died suddenly in 1422, leaving an infant son, Henry VI. The dream of dual monarchy crumbled. France seemed on the brink of collapse until a young peasant girl changed everything. Joan of Arc, claiming visions from saints, she convinced Charles VII, the disinherited Dauphin, to let her lead his forces. In 1429, she lifted the siege of Orleans, a miraculous victory that turned despair into hope. Soon after, she escorted Charles to Reims, where he was crowned king, though Joan was captured by Burgundian allies of the English in 1430 and burned at the stake in Rouen in 1431. Her legacy was sealed. She had revived the spirit of France. Her martyrdom inspired resistance across the land. Charles VII learned from Joan's example. He reformed the French army, replacing unreliable feudal levies with a standing force paid in regular wages. He invested in artillery, making cannons the new kings of the battlefield. In 1450, the French crushed the English at Formigny. In 1453, at Castillon, French artillery obliterated the English army, killing John Talbot, the last great English commander in France. The war was over. After 116 years, England held only Calais. France was united under Charles VII. The 100 Years' War left scars deeper than battlefields. For France, it was devastation beyond measure. Villages burned, fields left barren, population scattered. Yet from this crucible emerged a stronger, more centralized monarchy. France was no longer a loose collection of fiefs but a kingdom on the path to nationhood. For England, the war drained resource and morale. With the loss of France, political rivalries exploded into the Wars of the Roses. A bloody civil war that would last for decades. England turned inward, and the dream of a continental empire faded. Ordinary people suffered immensely. Peasants endured raids, famine, plague, and conscription. Yet the war also accelerated change. The decline of feudal levies and the rise of paid soldiers shifted the balance of power. The nobility's dominance waned. The 100 Years' War was not just a dynastic squabble. It was a hinge of history. Militarily, it marked the death of the knightly age. The longbow and the cannon ended the supremacy of armored cavalry and the castles that once defined medieval Europe. Politically, it birthed the idea of the nation-state. Frenchmen no longer fought merely for a feudal lord, but for France. The English, too, began to define themselves less as continental rulers and more as an island kingdom. Culturally, it produced legends. The heroism of the Black Prince, the glory of Henry V, the sacrifice of Joan of Arc all became immortal in song, chronicle, and later in plays by Shakespeare. Economically, the war shifted trade, undermined the feudal system, and set the stage for the Renaissance and early modern Europe. The 100 Years' War was not a clean or glorious affair. It was brutal, destructive, and exhausting. But it was also transformative. France emerged stronger, more unified, and ready to rise as Europe's most powerful kingdom. England, though defeated, turned its gaze inward, setting the stage for its later transformation during the Tudor era. And yet, what lingers most are histories: Edward III watching arrows darken the sky at Crécy, Henry V rallying his weary men at Agincourt, Joan of Arc, a peasant girl, leading armies and dying at the stake with the name of Jesus on her lips. It is a reminder that history is not only written by kings and treaties, but by ordinary people whose courage and suffering shaped the destiny of nations. The 100 Years' War ended in 1453, but its echoes endure. It was the end of one age and the birth of another, a century of struggle that reshaped Europe forever.